languages. What I mean by that is that it is the only people that have had a continuing existence from before the days of Jesus, going back all the way, at least at some junctures, back to the Assyrian captivity and the Assyrian conquest of Israel. They have never been in captivity. They've never been removed from the area of their language because they were the ones that were a lot of the, what do you say, the genetics that was supplied to the Samaritan people were the transplants, which were placed in this multicultural people swap that the Assyrians employed, just like we do today, the Romans and the Greeks. We practice multiculturalism, and thereby what we do is we inject other cultures in the midst of a predominant culture, and you begin to water down uh, that culture. You begin to actually use that as a means of social control. That's one of the primary means that conquering people use. You look at modern day Japan today. They've employed that very policy. They first went in and started messing with the marriage laws, told Hirohito he had to get rid of his 39 concubines, and now the oldest monarchy on the face of the earth is down to one heir, basically, somebody who's really going to live any length of time. My suggestion is that you ignore the U.S. policy concerning the emperorship and call it outmoded, outdated, and not, what do you say, practical for your own survival. And I suggest this 12-year-old boy get busy producing heirs. That's what I think. And I think he should do it, really soon because, obviously Pop still has the money, even though he's abdicated. He has the money, and it would be, what do you say, in their best interest to to you know to renegotiate the terms of the war treaty. It's just my opinion. But getting back to the Samaritans, again, those people have never had been displaced. They never had been assimilated into another culture. They pretty much stayed right there in the land. One of the indications is that, some of these people that the Hebrews were actually marrying were, became later the Samaritans, and they were, what do you say, half baked or whatever you want to call it. And they were, watered down in their language, speaking half the language of Ashdod and half Hebrew. This was of a cause of grief to Ezra. And anyway, the rest is history. But, they did retain the Hebrew language, those that, continued up to Jesus' day. The Samaritans also, I might add, are also Israelites and Hebrews that had, gone in the way of Jeroboam, and, they were part of the 10 northern tribes. And, of course, there were two competing priesthoods back then, the Mushite priesthood and the Aaronic priesthood. So, there's even before there was a multicultural transplant, there were, these Israelite influences that were there. And, though the king of Assyria did utterly empty the land, it wasn't down to the last man. The Babylonians left behind the poor to dress the farms and the vines and stuff like that. Because you got to remember, when an empire or whatever comes and conquers an area, they're going to want tribute, and you just can't leave it to the jackals and the lions. What's the point of conquering if you can't, obtain a means of tribute or revenue off of that land? So, they also left some people behind. And those were also later became what was known as the Samaritans. So they were the poor Israelites, the little subsistence farmers, and they later on became, uh, you know, basically thrown onto the stage of what we call the New Testament. So anyway, I would a whole lot rather listen to a people who have not been taken into captivity, have not had their what do you say, their rituals, their cultus changed in any way. I would rather listen to them than people who came, you know, what 1,500 what 700-800 years after the fact, uh, migrating out of the Caucasus Mountains and into what we know as Western Europe. I would rather listen to them when it concerns the Hebrew language, or I would rather listen to Samaritans than to those. Also, would much rather listen to the Samaritans as opposed to the Sephardic branch of Judaism, who also speaks what they call modern Hebrew, uh, and but they were actually removed and they were incorporated into the Islamic slave trade. They were assimilated into uh, uh, the remaining cultural influences of North and West Africa, some East Africa. So later Spain. So you have a what do you say, a cultural assimilation, a language assimilation that's going to take place over a period of time, and you begin to lose what do you say, the nuances of your own language. So yes, I think the Samaritans, and this is why, for example, Pastor Dow several years ago bought myself and Elder Becker, and I believe himself as well, a Hebrew Masoretic Torah that compares side by side the Masoretic text with the Hebrew. I don't want to get into the Masoretic text because I don't want to get in there for the reasons why uh, I think the Masoretic text is quite flawed, and it's also what supposedly what the King James is based on as far as the Torah and the prophets. Um, I would, again, I have to say again, I would rather go with the Greek text that was translated as best as could be translated out of the original Hebrew by Hebrew Israelite scholars at the request of Ptolemy to produce a Tanakh, law and the prophets, for his own personal library and for the Greek people. So I would a whole lot rather go to directly to the source, and this is why you have these problems when you read a King James text. It has no mention of the word or of Mordecai, and everybody knows what I think about the Book of Esther. Great on protocols, short on reality. Um, but anyway, that's why the Septuagint has Mordecai raising up Esther, grooming her, literally grooming her as a young woman or a young girl, uh, ultimately to be his wife, so that he might perform the levirate marriage to his father's brother who left no seed. The intent, of course, in Hebrew Israelite culture is so that your brother's DNA or your brother's seed doesn't perish in Israel. So the next brother uh, who's still living is duty bound and obligated to take his brother's wife. This is not mentioned. None of this is mentioned in the Masoretic based King James Version. It has been omitted, it's blotted out, doesn't exist. When actually the Book of Esther was a later addition to the Septuagint, the Torah, the Prophets, and Writings, and the Apocrypha, was by uh, by the same author that wrote the Book of Wisdom, Sirach. So again, I'm going to go with the direct sources, and why. Again, in the case of Book of Esther, uh, the uh, the book is not a factual document uh, of any real history. And the sad thing about it is, like I said in that other video on the Book of Esther, was that it's a shame that this guy had advanced knowledge of supposedly the request of the king, chamberlains, to go out and get every virgin out of the land of Israel, so they may come before this pagan uncircumcised king. And this Mordecai would cause his brother's name to perish in Israel because he did not execute his duty as husband in time for, what, do you got to have a ceremony? Really? What do you got to, wait for the government to approve of it? You got to wait for Hollywood ideals of romance to take place, some courting ritual or whatever, when DNA and genetics and a man's seed is on the line. So again, just like in the Hebrew language, even in the Hebrew written language, go to the oldest sources. They're usually quite more accurate. I might also add that the Masoretes were vehemently anti-Messiah. They fomented the same vile, rabid hatred for Jesus, for the apostles, and that the worst what do you say, person could possibly do. I mean, and we're going to listen to those people and pronounce them the authorities on a language 900 years removed in the Roman Empire, 900 years removed from their people, their culture, their language, and we're going to accept that as the best sources available? I don't think so. There's a lot of things you people need to learn about the scripture, and by pretending that those facts do not exist is not going to have you studied to show yourself approved unto Yah, nor is it going to get a well done, my faithful servant, because you were what do you say, didn't want to change. And it is time for us to grapple and deal with the sensitive issues concerning the scripture and come to some coherent consensus that is based on facts, based on truth, and based on reality, rather than kicking the Christian can down the road another 100 years until the label falls off, and then we can just call it Hebrew or Israelite. Anyway, these are some thoughts. Only 700 left on the earth. Kind of reminds you what Yah said, that he's going to turn to the people a pure language. I'm looking forward to that day. I really am. Not claiming to be an expert on Israelite language, but I do know when there are problematic issues in Scripture, that it would be better for people to face them boldly and respectfully, rather than to turn and look the other way. Shalom. Have a good day.